There are promises in life that seem so small, so ordinary, that no one expects them to last. Yet sometimes those quiet promises settle deep inside a heart and remain there for years, untouched by time. People leave because circumstances force them to. They forget because life becomes crowded with duties, losses, and distance. And often, they do not return, not because they never cared, but because the road back grows longer with every passing year. But not every heart learns to let go. Some kinds of love do not ask for explanations. Some kinds of waiting do not need reminders. They simply remain, steady and unshaken, no matter how much time passes. In a small peaceful town where the afternoons were slow and the same familiar faces passed the same familiar streets each day, there lived a brown dog named Max. He was not the kind of dog people admired at first glance. He was neither large nor impressive. He was not especially graceful, and no one would have called him extraordinary. But worth is not always measured by appearance. Sometimes it is measured by the place one holds in another's soul. And in the heart of a boy named David, Max was everything that mattered. David had grown up with Max by his side. From the earliest days anyone could remember, the two of them seemed woven into each other's lives. Every morning, David walked to school, and Max trotted beside him until they reached the corner near the bakery at the end of the street. Max would stop there, watching as David disappeared down the road, and every afternoon he would return to that same corner before school ended, waiting patiently for his boy to come home. It became such a natural part of the town's rhythm that people barely thought about it. The baker sweeping flour from his doorway, the old woman watering flowers across the lane, the children racing past with satchels on their backs. All of them had seen Max sitting there, eyes fixed on the road, tail lifting the moment David appeared. Their bond was made of small things, the kind that seem unimportant until they are gone. They ran together through the dusty streets in summer. They rested beneath the large tree in front of David's house after long afternoons of play. David shared pieces of bread with Max, whispered secrets into his fur, and sometimes wrapped both arms around his neck for no reason at all. Wherever David went, Max wanted to follow. Wherever Max curled up to sleep, David often sat beside him, one hand resting gently on his back. There were no vows between them, no spoken promises, no grand declarations. Yet everyone who saw them knew that this was loyalty in its purest form, simple, quiet, and complete. Then one cold, rainy evening, everything changed. Inside David's house, the calm of ordinary life had vanished. Boxes were stacked in every room, drawers were being emptied, footsteps hurried across the floor, voices rose and fell with urgency, and the front door kept opening to the wet darkness outside. David's father had been called away suddenly for work, and the family had no choice but to leave town that very night. There had been no time to prepare properly, no time to explain, and certainly no time for a child to understand what leaving forever really meant. Max sensed the confusion, but he could not understand it. He followed David from room to room, wagging his tail nervously, thinking perhaps that the family was simply going on a trip. David, pale and upset, kept reaching down to stroke Max's head, as if trying to comfort both of them at once. At one point, while luggage was being carried out through the front gate, and rain lashed across the yard, Max was guided outside so the adults could move quickly in and out of the house. In the chaos, the gate swung shut. No one noticed, not at first. By the time David climbed into the back seat of the car and looked through the rain-streaked window, Max was on the other side of the gate. David shouted at once. He pounded on the glass and cried for the car to stop. But the storm was loud. The adults were flustered, and the car had already begun pulling away from the curb. Max barked and leaped against the gate until it gave way. Then he ran. He ran with all the desperate strength in his small body, chasing the red glow of the taillights through the pounding rain. Mud splashed beneath his paws. Water streamed off his fur. His breath came hard and broken, but he kept going, as if love alone could make him fast enough to catch what was being taken from him. He did not understand why David was getting farther away. He did not understand why no one came back for him. He only knew that the one he loved was leaving, and every instinct inside him screamed not to let that happen. In the back seat, David twisted around, tears pouring down his face as he saw Max racing after them in the rain. He called his name again and again until his voice gave out. But then the car turned the corner. The road curved, and Max was gone from sight. A little later, when the family had reached the highway, David's father finally stopped the car. David begged them to turn back. He sobbed so hard he could barely speak. But the road behind them was already lost in darkness and storm, and by the time they could have returned, no one knew where Max would be. His mother held him as he cried, promising that they would come back for Max as soon as they could. David believed her because he needed to. But life, once broken apart, does not always allow promises to be kept. That night, Max returned to the house. He lay down in front of the locked door, soaked, trembling, and exhausted. The rooms inside were dark. No footsteps moved beyond the walls. No familiar voice called his name. Still, he stayed there, curled tightly against the cold, as if waiting just a little longer would make the door open and restore the world he knew. When morning came, Max walked to the corner near the bakery. It was the place where he had always waited for David. The place where separation had always ended and reunion had always begun. So he sat there, looking toward the road with the same patient hope as before. People passed, carts rolled by. School children hurried along with damp shoes and books under their arms. Max watched every face. David did not come. He came back the next morning, and the morning after that. Days turned into weeks. At first, the townspeople assumed the family would soon return. Then they realized the house remained locked and empty. Some pitied the dog immediately. Others thought he would eventually wander off and find another home. But Max did neither. During the day, he waited at the bakery corner. At night, he returned to David's house and slept by the door. It became his life, as natural to him as breathing. The people of the town began caring for him in small, humble ways. The baker set out scraps of bread and bits of meat. The woman across the lane placed water by the gate during hot afternoons. A shopkeeper left an old blanket on the porch in winter. Children spoke softly to him when they passed, and now and then someone tried to coax him indoors. But Max never truly belonged anywhere else. He accepted kindness, yet his heart remained fixed on one thing only. David would come back, and Max had to be there when he did. Seasons passed over the town like turning pages. In summer, heat shimmered above the road, and Max sat under the narrow line of shade near the bakery wall, panting but watchful. In autumn, dry leaves drifted around his paws while he stared down the street with unwavering eyes. In winter, the wind cut sharply between the houses, and his old blanket was never enough to keep out the cold, but still he came. In spring, when rain softened the earth and new green returned to the trees, Max lifted his head at every passing engine. Every unfamiliar footstep, every voice that sounded even slightly like memory. Years continued their quiet work on him. The bright brown of his coat faded with streaks of gray. His muzzle whitened. His legs lost some of their speed. Sometimes he would rise too quickly at the sight of an approaching car, only to stop after a few steps when he realized it was not David. Sometimes he followed boys with school bags for half a block, hope carrying him farther than strength, before slowly returning to his place. Yet if time weakened his body, it did nothing to weaken his devotion. That remained untouched. People began telling Max's story to strangers who passed through town. They spoke of him in lowered voices, as if speaking too loudly might break something sacred. Some called him foolish, most called him faithful. The children who had once watched him from afar grew older, and told the story to younger ones. The baker who had first fed him grew stooped with age, yet still looked for Max each morning before opening the shop. In a world where people so often forgot, changed, and moved on, Max became a living reminder that some hearts do not surrender what they love. Far away, David grew up carrying a wound he never fully outgrew. At first he asked about Max constantly, then less often, because each conversation ended in silence or sorrow. His parents had meant to return quickly, but work led to more moves, money grew tight, and one difficult year rolled into the next. Later, there was illness in the family, then loss, then the long demands of adulthood. Still, David never forgot that rainy night. He never forgot Max running after the car. That image stayed with him like a voice calling from somewhere he could never quite reach. As a young man, David often thought about returning, but the thought brought guilt as much as longing. What if Max was gone? What if the house had been sold, the street changed, the whole town erased by time? The fear of facing what he had lost kept him away almost as much as life itself. Yet memory is patient. It waits until a person is finally ready to be honest. And so many years later, David came back. It was a chilly morning when a car rolled slowly into the old town and stopped near the familiar bakery. David stepped out, no longer the boy who had once run laughing down the street, but a grown man carrying the weight of too many unfinished years. He stood still for a moment, looking around at the houses, the road, the bakery sign, all smaller than memory had made them, and yet painfully familiar. He felt his throat tighten. He had returned, hoping only to see the place once more, perhaps to ask a few old neighbors whether anyone remembered a brown dog named Max. He did not dare expect more. Near the wall by the bakery, an old dog lifted his head. Max had been lying quietly, conserving the little strength age had left him. But something in the sound of that car, or perhaps in the rhythm of those footsteps, made him look up. His ears twitched, his tired eyes narrowed. Slowly, with effort, he rose to his feet. David turned. For one suspended second, neither moved. The dog before him was thin and gray around the muzzle. His body was smaller now, worn by weather and years. But the eyes, those faithful, searching eyes, were unchanged. David's lips parted. His face drained of color. And then, in a voice barely stronger than a whisper, he said the name he had carried in his heart for all those years. Max. The sound moved through the morning like something holy. Max trembled. His tail gave one uncertain motion, then another, and suddenly his whole body came alive with recognition. He took a step forward, then another, and then as fast as his old legs could carry him, he ran. David dropped to his knees just as Max reached him. He caught him in both arms, holding him tightly as tears broke free without shame. Max pressed himself against David with the desperate joy of a heart that had waited too long to doubt itself now. He whined softly, licked David's face, pushed his head beneath his chin, and trembled with the force of his happiness. Around them, the street seemed to fall silent. The baker stood frozen in the doorway. A woman across the road covered her mouth with one hand. No one who saw that moment would ever forget it. David kept whispering, I'm sorry, Max. I came back. Perhaps Max did not understand the words, but he understood the voice. He understood the embrace. He understood that the waiting was over. From that day on, Max no longer sat at the corner near the bakery. He did not need to. The place where he had waited so faithfully for years had finally given him what he had never stopped believing in. David stayed in town long enough to be with him, to walk slowly beside him through the old streets, to sit with him beneath the tree in front of the house where their friendship had first taken root. And for the first time in a very long while, Max slept without watching the door. He had found his way home at last. Max did not live much longer after David's return. Age had already done its work, and no miracle could change that. But he lived long enough to rest beside the one he loved, long enough to trade waiting for peace, long enough to leave this world not with longing in his eyes, but with quiet contentment. And maybe that was miracle enough. The people of the town continued telling his story for many years. Not because it was a story of sadness, though it carried sorrow. Not because it was a story of coincidence, though its ending felt almost impossible. They told it because it reminded them of something the world too easily forgets. Real love is not always loud, and loyalty is not always convenient. Sometimes love is simply the decision to remain, to remember, to wait, to keep faith even when no one would blame you for giving up. Max never spoke a word, he never asked for praise, he never explained his devotion. Yet in the quietest and most powerful way possible, he showed everyone who knew him that hope can survive years, that love can outlast absence, and that some hearts remain true until the very end. And perhaps that is why his story continues to live on. Because deep down, every heart wants to believe that somewhere in this world, a love that faithful is still possible.